If your Prime Minister and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visits Australia, will you cooperate with that visit?
Yes.
And ignore the prescriptions from the International Criminal Court that he should be arrested?
Yes, without hesitation.
So he would not be arrested in Australia?
He would be a welcome guest in our country.
Well, and there you have it, sports fans. The very man whose party platform is built specifically on law and order, the man who is all about law and order, who prides himself on being a former policeman and enacting law and order, telling you blatantly, unequivocally, I'm going to ignore law and order if you elect me to run your country. Welcome, sports fans, to another Friday News Review with your host, Bintang Bernie, on this very solemn in Australia ANZAC Day, Friday the 25th of April. We are in the middle of the campaign run-up to a federal election here in Australia. And as I call it, the federal erection, because, you know, no matter whomever you vote for, you're about to get shafted in the biggest possible terms. But I find it interesting that, once again, due to a lack of proper journalism, we have those two clowns sitting there watching somebody actually say in front of them that they're going to ignore the International Criminal Court, which has issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, whether you agree with the arrest warrant or not, the point is it is a legal document, legally binding. And Australia is one of the founding members who signed up to the Rome Statute under which the International Criminal Court operates. So we have legally signed up to abide by the rulings of a court of law, and yet we have a man who has a history of demanding that we're stronger on law and order, stating quite clearly that he will refuse to implement said laws and orders which we have signed up to. So it doesn't matter that it's issued by an external court. We have signed up saying we will acknowledge that court, we accept that court, we support that court, we're part of the jurisdiction of that court. And yet here we are saying we'll completely disregard it. So it appears law and order only applies to the law and orders that specifically, at this point, Peter Dutton seems to decide whether he should implement them or not whether a court should implement them or whether we should abide by statutes that we've legally guaranteed and signed to. He'll just arbitrarily decide which laws to enforce and which ones not to enforce. Do you really want someone like that running the country? It amazes me that you would vote for somebody like that. Now, I'm not saying whether this is an issue of whether you're pro-conservative or anti-conservatives. As you know, old Bintang hates conservatives, because with conservatives you always get the same things, don't you? They never change. You always get the economy. They're big on the economy. You always get immigration. They're going to cut down immigration. The military, they always talk about increasing military budgets. Old Pete wants to put an extra 12 billion into our military budget in Australia here. Just plucked out of the air like that. Amazing when you want to fund schools and healthcare, there's never any money. Or, you know, social welfare programs are draining the economy. But in a country which already spends over 30 billion a year on defence, old Pete can just magically, you know, bim salabim, there's another 12 billion appears. And the other thing you always get, which Pete is big on, is, as you can see, law and order. Now, we've established Pete's big on law and order. Conservative parties around the world always, doesn't matter which country, which election, those four tenets of conservatism are always what they base their electoral campaign upon. Okay, As I said, economy, immigration, military, law and order, or as I like to paraphrase it, dollars, dagos, doom and directorates. Okay, they're gonna save you dollars. They're masters of the economy. They're going to save you from dagos. They're going to cut down on immigration because all those illegal immigrants and evil people from overseas who are just coming here to eat your children. Okay, they're going to save you from doom because the only way to make the world more peaceful is to spend more money on bombs. It's so Orwellian. It's not funny. And they're going to be strong on law and order. You're going to have directives telling you what to do and keeping the bad people from your front door. It's quite frightening. And as we know, most conservatives are. That's all they are. Anyway, being that we're in the midst of an electoral cycle, I wanted to look into the election campaigns in Australia a little bit, because I sometimes wonder if people know for whom they're really voting. And as you know, Bintang's first law, most people are stupid. I mean, we have the most ridiculous people in this country who are elected to our parliament. One, in particular, and this transcends any party or ideological bounds, because think, for example, Barnaby Joyce, who for a while was our Deputy Prime Minister. For those that don't know, in Australia, we have a coalition of conservatives. It's the Liberal National Coalition, essentially the city and country versions of the Conservative Party, who ironically are always warning us about the danger of coalitions and hung parliaments, and yet they only exist through a coalition. If memory serves, the Liberal Party, without the National Party's support, would only have won government twice in its existence. Since its inception, it would have only won government twice without the support of its own coalition. However, it continually rallies against the dangers of coalitions and hung parliaments, when once again, facts, as always, I just go to facts. Facts don't lie. Facts aren't biased for one side or the other. We're all biased. I'm biased, okay? But facts tell the truth. Now, we had a hung parliament under the Julia Gillard government, and it passed a record number of legislative changes and policies never been equalled in Australia's history. And yet people fall for this conservative danger of whinging about a hung parliament. It's so dangerous, it'll stuff up the government. The government can't function. No, the government can function if the government functions properly. But the Conservatives don't like to be challenged. They actually don't like the democracy that they bang on so much about. They like actually to be more of an authoritarian. We know what's right for you. We'll tell you, and don't have any of you lefties or pinkos get in the way and start debating our policies. Now, for example, as I said, Barnaby Joyce, he rallied against the gay marriage plebiscite. Here in Australia, we had a plebiscite to decide whether gay people could get married. Now, it didn't really affect me either way, and I have no issue with it, but there was a lot of debate about it. Now, one of the most ardent supporters of voting no for this proposal, for this referendum, was a guy called Barnaby Joyce. And his reason was that allowing gay people to get married would impact, it would damage, it would destroy the sanctity of marriage, of the holy union between a man and a woman. All very good, except he was campaigning this while he was banging his secretary behind his wife's back. Now, how could you vote for a person, regardless? That's why I say it's nothing to do with political ideologies. It's just straight out thinking. Here is a person who has lied to you, who's cheating on his wife while he's talking about the sanctity of marriage. You want to put that person in charge of your life? Because that's what we do with people. We put them in charge of laws and rules in our country. They're basically running our life. It's a very, very serious thing to do. And yet the vast majority of people in democracies around the world kind of just vote for whomever they feel is okay, without actually thinking, what is this person doing? And we bang on a lot about democracy. And one of my issues with democracy is that being able to vote in itself doesn't create a democracy. And a lot of people go, Bintang, how does that work? Isn't democracy all about voting? No, it's not. The key to democracy, the real principle behind democracy, is holding your government to account. It's about accountability and transparency. They're the key pillars of democracy. if you vote and you can't hold your government to account, then you're not electing a democratic government. You're not living in a democracy. What you're in effect doing is you're installing a limited tenure dictatorship. And let's be honest, that's pretty much what happens. You vote for a government, they come in with a lot of policies, then they do whatever the hell they want. And how much say do you, as a citizen, as an individual, how much say do you have in this? How much is actually your vote, your free will? And in a lot of countries where criticising the government is illegal, I say, well, they're not true democracies. You might be able to vote, but I wouldn't say that voting for a government that you can't criticise, where it's an offence to criticise the government, well, you're installing a dictatorship for 4 years, and then you're installing another one. That's all you're doing. So it's very important that in Australia, one thing we're very lucky is that we do have a lot of independent media. As you know, old Bintang believes our media is nothing more than a propaganda arm of the government. Well, the government's a propaganda arm of who knows who. But we do have a lot of independent media sources, and that's a really good thing. And some of them are really good. And I urge you to look at some of these independent media sources, to have a look at what's actually going on behind the scenes, and to see who's actually running the country, basically. Because when you start to dig, sadly, it's not who you think. Now, one of the good independent media sources I've been looking at lately is a group called Michael West Media, MWM. And I urge you to look at Michael West Media and donate if you can, because we need to keep independent media sources alive and strong, and they rely on public funding. It's very hard to run these things. Michael West Media have done an article recently, and they looked into a couple of groups who have been very active. I don't know, those of you on social media would have seen a group posting a lot called Advance Australia. So Michael West Media looked into two groups, one called Better Australia and one called Advance Australia. And what they found was not interesting, I would say alarming. Sorry, excuse me once again. I get dry mouth when I do this. Now, Better Australia, okay, is a group who are run apparently to Better Australia. Now, their aim is to influence public thinking and voter perception. So that's very important, because that's affecting how our democracy is run. So it's important we know who is running these groups who are trying to impact our democracy, because that's a very fundamental thing to know. Now, Better Australia had a meeting on the 12th of February this year at offices in 50 Bridge Street. Okay, now, Michael West Media have done a wonderful job in exposing this. Now, at the meeting, we had two people in particular, which this really shows you how politics works. One guy was called a guy called Yaron Finkelstein. Now, he's a Liberal Party member. He is director of the Liberal Party think tank, the Menzies Research Centre. So he's heavily involved in the Liberal Party. Okay, that's fine. They're a registered party. Okay. He's former private secretary to Scott Morrison, previous Liberal Prime Minister of this country. And he was a special counsel to Dominic Perrottet, who was the Liberal Premier of New South Wales for a while. So the point I'm making here, and the point that Michael West Media are making, is clearly you would think, well, this is a Liberal Party group, okay? Better Australia. Fair enough. Who was also there? A guy called Eric Roosendahl. Now, who's Eric? He's currently co-convener of Labor Friends of Israel. He was the former General Secretary of New South Wales Labor. So straight away, okay, we'll come back to the connection to Israel in a minute. But straight away, doesn't it concern you that this group, who supposedly is influencing, public thinking and trying to, sway your vote at an election, has both a senior Labor and senior Liberal Party member running it? So where is the division? Where is the distinction between parties? For those overseas who don't know, Australia basically runs on a two-party preferred system. We have the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, the Conservatives and these days, the not-so-Conservatives. But we have now these two parties basically in cahoots trying to affect your vote, okay? Now, it's interesting that both of these people, okay, Finkelstein and Roosendahl, both previously worked on the executive on the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. Now, those of you who are regular listeners or watchers of Friday News Review, both of you, will remember last week I mentioned that the biggest threat to Western democracies is not China, it's not Russia, it's not Vladimir Putin, it's not Xi Jinping, it is Zionism. And here again we see the evil roots of Zionism, how it is infiltrating in a country like Australia. So you've got these two guys who clearly have a massive allegiance to Israel, and they're on this group, which of course is promoting pro-Israeli viewpoints, condemning anyone who protests against Israel. Palestinians are all terrorists, etc., etc. So this is dangerous. And the danger here is that both members of the Liberal and Labor Party are colluding together to influence the way you vote. Now, it goes on because the chair of Better Australia is a lady called Sophie Calland. Now, who's Sophie Calland? Well, okay, she's a member of the Australian Labor Party. Okay, so here we have these, this subtle crossover of policies. She's a member of the Alexandria branch of the Australian Labor Party. She is also director of a campaign called Put the Greens Last. Now, why this campaign against the Greens? The Greens are the only major party that has stood up and opposed the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And yet now we have members of the Labor and the Liberal Party colluding together to actually campaign against them. Now, whether you like the Greens or not, I think it's a danger, and I think it's concerning when you have any party whose policy is based on, or any organisation whose policy is based solely on stopping people voting for another party. You shouldn't be stopping people voting for another party. You should be providing alternatives to encourage them to vote for you. That's how democracy is supposed to work. And I'll give you an example. I was confronted once in the street many years ago by a campaigner for a party which was running solely against Pauline Hanson's One Nation. There was more than one person in the party at the time, so the neurons had multiplied. Now, anyone who knows Bintang Bernie knows I have scant regard for Pauline Hanson. I describe her as the woman with the IQ of a brick and the personality of an unflushed toilet. And I don't shy away from that. I think she's a racist. I think she's evil. And worst of all, I think she's really, really fucking dumb. However, when I was confronted with this person who wanted me to sign up to vote for this party, whose sole platform was to stop Pauline Hanson's One Nation, I refused. And the person kind of arced up a bit, and I went off, and I was quite angry, because you should never have a party that's based solely on stopping another party. A political movement should be based on giving you alternatives, good, logical, better alternatives. If you think a party is no good, come up with policies that are better than that party and encourage people to vote. It's progressive rather than regressive. So my concern here with Better Australia is their aim is to stop people voting for the Greens. Well, it's people's right to vote for the Greens. It's people's right to vote for anyone. And it's not up to Better Australia, Sophie or, Mr. Finkelsteins and Roosendahl to stop that because they don't like it. Now, why don't they like it? Well, it's interesting. Old Sophie's partner is a bloke called Offia Berbum. Berenbaum, sorry, I think I pronounced that right, okay? And once again, apologies to anyone whom I mispronounce. He was exposed as being behind that linked cafe stunt you would have remembered, where they dressed a bloke up in an Israeli t-shirt, wearing a hat with the Israeli flag and a big Star of David, and they took him into the Cairo cafe, hoping, of course, that people there, being mainly Arabs and possibly Muslims, would arc up, and they discreetly filmed it, all for Channel 10. This is the kind of, doesn't that concern people? How underhanded this is. This is then to expose and go, look at the anti-Semitism, look how evil it is. We need to crack down. And of course, people have cracked down on it. We've got all these laws now, which are all bullshit. There is scant anti-Semitism in this country. People are protesting against Zionism, against the rape of Palestine and the genocide of Gaza. That's not anti-Semitism, especially when the people who are being bombed and killed are Semitic people as well. But we'll go into that another time. Now, there's another group that's popped up a lot, and I've seen them on my Facebook feed quite often, called Advance Australia. They get a lot of funding from the petrochemical industry. They're all dead set against renewables. You'll see them talking about how renewables are evil, and how we need to stay with coal and gas, and nuclear is a better option. Interestingly enough, reports just come out that's estimated that Peter Dutton's campaign for nuclear energy will blow out to a cost of approximately $4.3 trillion. So much for that. Anyone who believes nuclear energy is the way forward is an idiot. It's, as I said in previous Friday News Reviews, it's outdated technology and we don't need it. It's expensive. And if you look at countries who have thriving nuclear industries, I mean, the latest nuclear plant in Britain is years behind in its construction, massive cost blowout. And you want to think a country like Australia, which has very little nuclear technology, as I've said, I know a mate of mine from school runs the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor, where we have a small reactor for research. We are so far behind other countries in nuclear technology, and even they can't get it on time and on budget. How the hell are we going to do it? Anyway, that's another issue. Now, Advance Australia, as well as being all about fighting against renewables, of course, they fight against the Greens as well. The poor old Greens cop a lot, don't they? And you've got to wonder why. Why are so many people targeting the Greens? I always think it's a badge of honour when people target you. You must be, if you're annoying Conservatives, you must be doing something right. But Advance Australia urges voters to vote against the Greens, and one of their campaigns has been Voters Against Extremism, and that's run by a guy called Michael Danby. Now, he's the ex-Labor member for the seat of Macnamara. So once again, we have a Labor member in this group, and that's fine. People have a right to go and support groups as that they want. But what's interesting, and this is the bit, like I said, this is what concerns me. Advance Australia, okay, which has Michael Danby, the ex-Labor bloke, they also received $500,000 in donations from the Victorian Liberal Party's holding group, which is called the Cormac Foundation. So here you have a Labor guy running this campaign against the Greens, and the Liberal Party of Victoria donating vast sums of money into it. So once again, it's this collusion. This is my point. The collusion is the concern here. Labor and Liberal working together under the table to influence your vote. You know why? Because clearly they're concerned. The Greens have made big strides, and so have the Independents. Why? People are fed up with mainstream policies because they see the two parties as almost indivisible. And as Michael Westmeter is exposing, it appears they are, because they're working together. They're colluding to fight against the Greens, which they see as their big threat. And of course, they will put money into campaigns against independents because they don't want independents. Independents are good. They provide an alternate view and they allow debate in the Senate and in the Parliament. And that is how democracy is supposed to work. So, one quick pause. Sorry, quick interruption there. Now, once again, what concerns me about this group, Advance Australia, and how they're attempting to alter your perspective is there was a recent meeting in the offices of former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott. And who attended it? Well, Warren Mundine, you may have heard of. He's the spokesperson for Advance Australia. Warren Mundine was a guy who was part of the Labor Party and then became part of the Liberal Party, and nobody really knows what Warren's up to, except that it can't be any fucking good. Who else attended this meeting? Peter Dutton. Now, here's the guy who's involved in Advance Australia, okay? Now, Advance Australia lobbies against renewables, as I've said, but they're also highly pro-Israel, okay? You can see my concern here is that the man who's trying to be Prime Minister who's going to ignore international arrest warrants whilst being strong on law and order is heavily influenced and heavily involved with groups who are highly connected with the pro-Israel lobby, with Zionists in Australia. So my concern is that Peter Dutton is not representing Australia when he talks about Benjamin Netanyahu. He's representing his Israeli backers, his Zionist backers. Now remember, I'm always very clear to point out the issue here is not Judaism. There are some very, very brave Jewish people around the world and some very, very brave Jewish organizations who speak out against Zionism. The issue here is the insidious effect of Zionism and how it's permeating our elections here and how it is attempting to alter our democracy. That's a real concern, Australia, and it's something I think that should be investigated. Where is 60 Minutes? Where are all these in-depth, journalistic programs? Why aren't they doing stuff like this? Why am I finding this out through Michael West Media, through independent sources? This should be mainstream. We should be concerned that Zionist lobbies are actively campaigning against independent Australian parties like the Greens, whether you like them or not. They're an Australian registered political party representing Australia who have every right to be where they are and shouldn't be targeted. It's great that we have independent groups like Jackie Lambie, some of the great independent senators I really, really like. They call them the Teals. They've tried to bunch them all together once again to create that impression that they're all a group. These people are all individuals and they stand up, they speak out, and we need more of them in Parliament. Whether they are people that you support or not, the point is Zionists shouldn't be raising huge sums of money. I mean, Advance Australia claims to have raised a $5 million war chest specifically to smash the Greens. That's appalling in my books. They have 245,000 member base. I would be happy to put money on the fact that they're all Zionists, they're all part of the pro-Israeli lobby. This is not Israel. This is Australia. Policies, views of Israel should not be impacting Australian politics, should not be influencing Australian voters. And I stand by that. Anyway, hopefully people will learn and people will think about who they're voting for. Try to vote for an independent if you can, but be warned. Check them because, as I said, I'm a big fan of independents, but not all independents are good. There's a local independent guy running in my area, and so I immediately thought, well, I might vote for him. But of course, first of all, just a little thinking, checked him out. And he's an anti-renewables nutter who thinks nuclear is the way to go. So straight away I think, well, no, I'm not going to vote for him. But start to look for alternatives. Don't just donkey vote Labor and Liberal into office. And I'd be particularly concerned about the Conservatives and the way that they seem to be in bed with these splinter groups. But then you go to the other side and you see that, Labor Party seems to be in bed just as well. It's, as George Carlin once said, it's a big club and you ain't fucking in it. Anyway, one last little thing I'll mention today because it is ANZAC Day and I'm careful not to do too much about ANZAC Day because my program is intended to be satirical and obviously ANZAC Day and war veterans and war dead are nothing to make any kind of humorous joke about. However, for those that don't know, in the 25th of April 1915, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, which is what the acronym ANZAC stands for, started an assault on the Gallipoli Peninsula. British generals thought that was the way to go. The British were involved too. I think it's often forgotten. A lot of British soldiers died in that assault too. So let's give credit where credit's due. But it raised the ire of Australians. It still did. It started a schism between us and the empire of old, where we felt we were being used as cannon fodder by the Brits. Now, I'm not going to go too much into that out of respect for the day that it is. However, I just wanted to point out that another great independent media source, which is the Grey Zone, established by a wonderful man, Robert Perry, who's now passed away, unfortunately. Another group, another publication you should check out. They've now released a whole lot of papers and they've exposed I guess you could say almost a repeat of ANZAC Day. The Brits haven't learned, sadly. what happened was in 2023, the British met with General Zaluzny, which you may remember was the previous commander of the Ukrainian forces. And they're adamant about establishing a maritime raiding force to go across the Dnieper River in the Kherson region. And they wanted to attack a small village on the eastern bank called Krakny. I've got it written down, excuse me. Krinkny. I've probably done that completely wrong. But this was their strategy. And you would hope that the Brits would have learned the futility of the Gallipoli campaign. But no, they started looking to train the first 1,000 recruits with Zaluzny. The Ukrainians at first weren't interested, but the Brits pushed it. And the Brits have been one of the biggest agitators for the Ukraine war to keep Ukraine fighting. And they kept pushing about this maritime raiding force. We'll go across the banks and we'll get those Russians. Now, on the 30th of October of 2023, they started an amphibious raid across the Dnieper River in Kherson, and they promised the Ukrainians they would have, they trained them up first. They gave them raiding boats and all this stuff. Took them to commando training areas in the UK and Scotland, trained them. And this was going to be a crack force, so we're going to go over there and establish a bridgehead and really basically fuck with the Russians. Just like Gallipoli, some 90 years previous, it was a disaster. And just like Gallipoli, they refused to accept it was a disaster, and they allowed more and more young men to go across and be slaughtered by the Russians in what was, any sensible, objective look at this campaign would go, it was set for disaster, and the minute it went wrong, you would pull back. But they didn't. They kept pushing the Ukrainians, and as you know, my view of Zelensky is he's nothing more than just a fucking puppet. He does whatever he's told, and of course, he let it continue. A resident hero and poster boy. And I just wanted to quote to you, this was from a Marine officer who was there, Ukrainian Marine officer, and his words. Now remember, they went across in October 2023, and this was set in May 2024. They were still there fighting what they knew was a losing battle. There's times when you just know this hasn't worked. Pull out, boys. Jesus Christ. Eisenhower even considered pulling the Yanks off Omaha Beach. There's a time where you just go, we need to cut our losses and get out here. Now, this Marine officer said May 2024 was a disaster. We had to withdraw in the spring at the latest due to the foggy season. The fog would give them cover crossing back across the river. We could have gotten all of our soldiers out at that point, but instead we waited until the very last moment. And as a result, thousands of Ukrainians died needlessly. Now, as you know, I've got very clear views on the causes of that war, and I'm no fan of the Ukrainian regime. However, I deeply deplore the way that Ukrainian young men are being used as cannon fodder. And here is an example of it again. So, as we say, lest we forget, unfortunately it seems the Brits have forgotten and they're up to their old tricks. So I thought that might be appropriate on ANZAC Day to remind everyone that, history has repeated, and that's something that should actually be exposed once again. The Brits creating another Gallipoli and another disaster, and as usual, doing it with other countries' troops. Way to go, boys. Anyway, this is Bintang Bernie, wishing you all a happy Friday, paying respects to our servicemen and women, our veterans, and to the fallen, and reminding you, as always, remember, in this world, there's two kinds of people. Avoid both of them.